Welcome to the post-review show, where we review board games after other people have already reviewed them. And today, we are going to be reviewing Vast, the Crystal Caverns by, well, let me get this straight, by David Somerville and Patrick Leder. I think that's how you pronounce his name, Leder. So this is the original game concept is by this guy named David Somerville, and then Patrick, who does Leder Games, picked it up and brought it to Kickstarter. Right away, I want to state that I am reviewing the second edition or the second printing of this game, not the Kickstarter edition. I'm in an unusual position in this regard. I'm actually an original Kickstarter backer, and I've got the black sleeve here to prove it, but as a professional and very high-profile board game reviewer, I was given the opportunity by Leder Games. They sent me a review copy of the second edition printing of Vast, as well as the miniatures expansion, which we're going to be talking about in this review, and Fearsome Foes, which today, in this review, we're just going to be talking about the base game. Hopefully I'm able to communicate to you how big this game is and why we need to start here, and why I needed to start here as a reviewer before I could even crack into Fearsome Foes. The art looks like it's going to be maybe a casual game, a game that you could break open and play with your kids. And the game is not a casual game. It is very much a gamer's game, and I love it. The deal with this game, its whole charm, its whole sort of claim to fame is that it is the most asymmetrical game that I have ever played. And I love asymmetrical games. I love asymmetry in my games in general. One of my favorite games is Star Wars Rebellion, which I think does a really nice job with the asymmetry between the Empire and the Rebels. But in that game, and as is usually the case, you're still playing the same game. It's just maybe slightly modified, maybe very modified. In this game, you are playing different games completely. I mean, you really are. It's amazing that they are able to mesh them as well as they have in this game, because they work completely differently. You actually sit in table order. So you start the game over here as the knight. The knight always goes first. The knight's whole deal is that you are trying to get your grit up. This is basically like leveling up as in any RPG ever. You start with 2 hero cubes, which is what this is meant to mean, that you start at level 1 and that these are 2 hero cubes. There are some things about the game that are a little confusing, and we'll get to those. For me, this was 1, and for other people that I played with, but I digress. You start with 2 hero cubes. As you level up, you get more hero cubes to do things like pump up your movement, perception, or strength, and you have 7 health, and hopefully you don't lose it all, because if you do, you die, and the goblins win the game. The goblins go second. The goblins are maybe my favorite faction to play with, partially because I just love goblins. I went as a goblin for Halloween like 3 years in a row, and just because I like goblins. So, how the goblins work is, depending on your rage, you draw a amount of war cards, and then you pick one, and then you pump up your tribes equal to the amount of discs you have, and they don't sit as well as you would like them to. And then this is for monsters and this is for secrets. Monsters are cool. This one's a gnome. On their turn, you can activate each tribe once, and if they are not revealed, right now all of these tribes are hidden, you can reveal them on the map on their starting space. So this is the Bones tribe. Bones tribe is ready. Yep, that's a reference to Spider-Man 1. The Eye tribe can't actually enter the board, so they would have to lurk, which is almost like being hidden. And the Fang tribe can enter on the Fang space, and they want to kill the knight. If they kill the knight, they win the game. They don't really have a lose condition, they just either win or don't win. After the knight goes, it's time for the dragon. The dragon always goes after the goblins. Now, on the knight's turn, the knight probably would have come in here and explored this space, which it's worth noting that The knight needs perception equal to the amount of encounters that it has faced, and this is a ambush. So if there was a hidden tribe, they could then ambush the knight and attack them. I'm not going to explain the specific rules of how this works. I just want to highlight what you're already hopefully starting to see, which is the rock, paper, scissors nature of this game. The knight, the whole reason why the knight's in the game is she is here to kill the dragon. That's why she's here. And I guess the dragon is a bad dragon and has terrorized the people. I sort of am very sympathetic to the dragon. I feel like the dragon is just trying to sleep. And also in my headcanon, the goblins worship the dragon because they don't normally attack the dragon. So I kind of see that like the dragon is their deity, which explains why they're trying to kill the knight. The dragon wins by moving these sloth tokens off of these 3 sections, so greed, hunger, and pride. And you can only do 1 sloth token per space. And when you get them down here to this 11, now you go from being a sleepy dragon, which the first turn the dragon starts in the same space as the knight, and the dragon starts underneath the knight. So basically the idea is like this, right? But once you hit 11, you become an awake token, but you're still underground until you can find a crystal space. Enter the crystal space, smash the crystal space, and then walk out and fly away. The dragon wins by escaping the knight, who is trying mercilessly to kill the dragon, even though the dragon did nothing wrong and just wants to sleep. Now, that's a 3-player game. But one of the things that's really interesting about this game is that there's up to 5 roles in the base game. There is the knight, the goblins, the dragon, the cave, and then the thief. But you can play this game with a variety of different combinations. So you can play a 2-player knight goblins, you can play a 2-player knight dragon, you can play it 2-player knight cave? That's fun.
I don't think you can.
I think you can, I just think you shouldn't.
How come we've never done that?
Well, I'll get to that in a minute. Dragon versus cave, goblins versus... So you can play as dragon versus cave, or goblins versus cave, or goblins versus dragon, or knights versus thief. There's a lot of different combinations.
I don't think you can do knight cave because...
Knight versus cave.
Oh, really?
Right there.
Oh.
So, there's a lot of different combinations at the different player counts. But I will say this about the different combinations of the characters. The first game of Vast that I ever played was right after I got my Kickstarter edition, and I just let people choose whatever role that they found intriguing, and we ended up playing a cave thief dragon game. And it was by far the least interesting and fun game of this that I've ever played. And partially it had to do with that there were some issues on the first edition player boards and the first edition rulebook, which I'll take this opportunity right now to talk about because I've had the opportunity to look. I looked through all the original cards and all the original boards and everything. There are minor changes to these boards in the second edition printing. They're not big enough that if you are a Kickstarter backer that you need to really worry about. If you are a Kickstarter backer, the only thing that I would suggest is that you download a PDF version of the new rulebook, because in the new rulebook there's a general rules section. Now it's here, it's really necessary. The original rulebook just goes right into the different roles, which if you do understand all the different roles, you can kind of figure it out, but that's one of the difficulties of this game, and I don't fault it for this difficulty, but it's worth discussing. The other thing that's worth discussing is the combinations of characters. That game that I was just talking about wasn't fun, or it wasn't as fun as this game has been in subsequent plays for me, because it was missing something. You see, the cave exists to kill everybody. It's my favorite role in the whole game. I haven't tried a lot of the combinations like Knight Cave, Dragon Cave, but I can tell you in that one game we played, there was something missing. The cave turn felt boring because there was only 2 other players. And then the other 2 players was the thief and the dragon. And the thief is essentially doing their own thing, and the dragon is essentially doing their own thing. And so you really just had 3-player solitaire. It didn't work. It wasn't a bad game, but it wasn't the amazing joy of this game when you have the roles done, when you have the roles chosen carefully. A knight, goblin, dragon game is always fun because the knight's trying to kill the dragon is killing the goblins left and right, the goblins are trying to kill the knight, and one thing that's interesting is when the cave's not in the game, the cave itself becomes one of the ways in which players manage their turn and try to build the cave to their advantage. Goblin players will always be trying to, goblins have a really hard time moving through light spaces, and so, but they can move almost infinitely through dark spaces. So this goblin wouldn't want to charge this way, so on the goblin's turn, they would be trying to build up dark passages as much as possible to go around, right? Meanwhile, the knight is going to be wanting to build out and trying hopefully to get events and crystals, and the dragon similarly is going to want to try to use the shape of the cave to their advantage. Then at 4 players, you get to play with the cave. The cave is really interesting. It's almost as if God has entered the game, doling out fortune and misfortune in equal measure. When the cave plays, the cave lays out these tiles, and that's actually really interesting because the cave, Carcassonne style, is always looking at 3 tiles and can choose which one. Actually, I don't think that's in the vanilla rules of Carcassonne, but it's how everybody should play. The cave has a very important role when the cave shows up as almost like a GM, right? Now the cave wants to win, but the way the cave wins is by dragging the game out long enough that they're able to build the entire cave and then collapse the cave and kill everybody inside of it. It makes me think of that scene in Aladdin, right? When he picks up the thing and it all starts collapsing. You almost have to help all of the players. It doesn't feel like you're hurting them, it feels like you're helping them. Because what you want is for the knight not to die, because if the knight dies, the goblins win. And you want the dragon not to die, but you also don't want the dragon to wake up and escape, right? So you're trying to help everybody, but also block them. It's a really fun role when you're playing with 4 people. The cave definitely makes the game longer. Not only does 4 players make the game longer because 4 players, but the cave makes the game longer because they will, if they're doing their job properly, make sure that nobody else wins or make it harder and take longer for anyone else to win. It's super interesting. I love a 4-player game with a dragon, a knight, goblins, and a cave. And now, for the last role, in a 5th-player game, you enter the thief. The thief was, after that initial play, my least favorite character, and I did not understand the thief. I felt like, oh, well, they sort of showed up in the Kickstarter, and it's just one of those things where they just threw in a new character, and they don't quite work as well as the 4-player game. Well, I'm wrong. Okay, I was wrong. In a 5-player game with the thief, it's amazing how different the game truly is. Not only do they make the game longer because they add their own special sections, but the thief, remember how I just told you that the cave makes the game longer because the cave tries to keep anybody else from winning? The thief is the rock to the cave's scissors. This whole thing is very rock, paper, scissors, right? Not only is it asymmetrical, but it's like the goblins can't attack the dragon in a normal game unless you're playing like a goblins dragon game and there's a variant card. Right, it's a very much like rock beats scissors, scissors beats paper, paper beats rock kind of formula, right? This is the character that keeps the cave in check, because the longer the game drags out, the more likely it is that the thief wins. So the thief, in my opinion, falls flat at low player count games. You should pick a more active character or a more active role. But at a 5-player game, they're epic because they add, it's almost like a timer element, right? The thief player is this timer element, and they can mess up other people's turns because they can pickpocket people, which is super annoying for everybody they pickpocket and helps them win their own condition. So they're in the game, they're affecting the game, they're picking up chests. They can be killed by the knight and or the goblins. It's really, 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 really interesting. Now, none of these roles in and of themselves is particularly complicated or particularly complex. But the thing about this is the way it all works together is pretty complex. At first blush, it's difficult to understand, if you're the goblins, what you can even do to stop the dragon from winning. Because like I mentioned, it's that sort of rock, paper, scissors thing where really the goblin's main antagonist is the knight. And so if the dragon is running away with the game, that can, and the goblin needs the dragon not to wake up, it's hard to know what to do at first. Now, there are things you can do, and it takes advanced play and many plays to understand them. But the other thing that it takes is really, before you can start to enjoy and understand and appreciate everything that's happening in this game, you kind of have to play as the goblins and then the dragon and then the knight, or in whatever order. They're so different that you don't understand the constraints of your enemies, right? You don't understand what they can do, and you don't understand what they can't do. It feels like magic. You don't understand how the dragon is moving the sloth cubes down. It just seems like you just have to trust that that player is doing what they ought to be doing. But it's very difficult to play a game well where you don't know what your opponent needs to do, and therefore how to block them or how to anticipate them. You can't anticipate their turns. It's a problem if you play this game once or infrequently. This is not a game to be purchased and played once a year. This is a game that really shines at multiple plays back to back, where you switch up the roles, and then you start to think, oh wow, that turn that you took last game, I didn't appreciate it at the time, but it was actually really cool because now I understand what's difficult about your character. And they are all constrained. They will all feel claustrophobic, which thematically works really well because you're in this cave, right? You will be frustrated as you play each of these characters. You will feel like everyone else is overpowered compared to your character. And that's great. It's really great when you've actually played all of those characters and you've felt that way in each of the roles. And then you start to understand this beautiful dance that is happening between these different characters. This is why this game, despite looking almost like a family weight game, is actually a very complex gamer's game. And as I mentioned, I don't recommend that you get it unless you're prepared to play a lot of it. And play it at different player counts. Play it at 3, play it at 4, play it at 5, a lot. And it's also pretty good at 2. It really is. A knight goblin game is fun. My only caveat is that I actually do think that there are better games designed for 2 players that get to the table more quickly and are as satisfying and end as deep and as fun. Raptor is fantastic. I wouldn't get this game to play at 2 players, is what I'm trying to say. It's not a criticism. I'm just saying you don't really reduce the amount of setup all that much. The cave is still complicated. You want to get the most out of it, you need the higher player counts. However, once you start to play the game a lot, I think it'll become interesting to play 2 players in order to explore those dimensions of the game. I mean, there's a high level to this game. I can see people getting really good at it as they play it more. So with that in mind, if you are gonna buy Vast, the 2nd edition printing, or you already own the Kickstarter edition, I've got to tell you that I really, really recommend you get the miniatures expansion. This is, I think, $60 MSRP, and it's available at Cool Stuff Inc. right now and Fun Again Games right now. I wouldn't get it on Amazon, it's marked up. It's worth it to buy this, I think, is it $35 or $25 MSRP expansion? And I wouldn't normally. I'm not the kind of person that I would have bought this for myself, but this came with the review edition that I got, and man, do I love it. Vast is a game that sometimes gives you too many options, right? From the fact that there are actually difficulty cards that you can use that change the difficulties of, make it harder or easier for certain characters, to me, I've never played with these and I never will. It seems to break something for me about the beauty of the game, right? Also, in the base copy of the game, every character comes with cardboard standees or a wooden version, right? Or if you get the plastic, you have a third choice. This is so indicative of this game that, as I've mentioned, gives you, I think, sometimes too many options, right? Like too many different combinations of characters that don't all really sing the way the ideal combination does. I think this game deserves enough plays that if you're gonna get it at all, get it with these plastic minis, because man, are they great. Normally I don't comment on quality of these kinds of things too much, but I think it's worth noting if you're gonna spend, they're not cheap, right? They're worth it. They were able to take an art style that I personally really, really like, and I think really get that to come through in the plastic mini in a way that these are cool, but the wooden piece just doesn't do justice. It really does for me. You know, these are part of the miniatures expansion, so these crystals are, again, like super superfluous because in the base game you have cardboard chits that are crystals as well as literal little plastic crystals. There's a lot of different options for crystals, but these are just great chunky pieces. This is maybe the most superfluous plastic piece ever in the game, right? Because you see that, this is the entrance, see that? That's all it is. But you know what? I love it. I love this little ladder. I don't know why. The most superfluous piece ever is this first player token that I have not found a use for yet. But I think this is worth every penny. These goblins are fantastic and they really add something. This to me really adds something to the game. The other thing that I would say that you'd be crazy not to get if you're getting this game is this little booster pack. This is like $5 MSRP, and it is absolutely a good addition to this game if you, again, already own the first edition printing or are looking at getting, if you're buying it new, you're getting the second edition. These cards add a lot more variety for the goblins. They add a different kind of secret card that you have to activate with a treasure token, which gives the goblins a reason to pick up treasure tokens other than to just deny other players, which is a good idea. There's a lot of variety here. They add a couple side quests. They add some really interesting treasure. And they also add some power cards for the dragon, which I think are really important. They add these scales, which I think these are a great addition to the dragon. There's also a third scale that comes in it, this platinum scale. This is broken. Just trust me, don't use it. The dragon is overpowered. So, I hope it's clear that there is a lot in this game. And the first time you play it, you're not gonna appreciate the depth of it. It's going to feel like a light to medium weight game that's clunky. But the more you play it, the more you realize that it's actually a very streamlined, complex gamer's game. You need to play it as each of the roles, and you need to play it multiple times, and hopefully multiple times in rapid succession. And you will start to really appreciate a game that, honestly, what it feels like chess meets rock, paper, scissors, right? It's that level of strategy, but because, unlike chess, you're playing very different roles, very interesting things happen. It's a very intriguing game. It's not a casual game, and it's not a game for people who don't enjoy the kind of moment of something interesting. This is an interesting game. This is not a beer and pretzels game. I want to reiterate that I love Kickstarter, and because it brings us games like this, right? That I think any normal publisher would say, that looks like a beer and pretzels game. And it's not a beer and pretzels game. And that's not a knock. I love this art style. And I love a game that's this complex, that is this art style, and is about knights and goblins as opposed to trains, right? Or isn't like overly grandiose with its, Warhammer style goblins. I think it's the perfect package. I actually think this is a great synergy between the light, fun art style and theme of the game and the complexity of it. but it's crunchy. It's so much crunchier than it looks like it's going to be. This is a game which is difficult to learn and even harder to master. And the reason why is for a variety of reasons. I've thought a lot about it. First of all, it's a really hard game to learn because someone has to learn all the roles. And so you're essentially learning 5 different rules, right? Or what I've found is the best way to deal with that is rather than have it be on one person to know the whole game, I just say, okay, you know what? They do this really cool thing where it's like, here's the dragon cheat sheet, so you just give that to the dragon player, you give this to the cave player, and you give this to the goblin, and you give this, and you just say, it's your responsibility to know how to play this game for your character. But then you've got 4 different people learning 4 different games and trying to figure out how they go together. And as I've said, it's tough at first to figure out how some of these roles mash, or anyway. There are these new things in the new rules that are like how to interact, which I think is really helpful. The new rules are good. They're not great. I want to be clear here. This is not the worst rule book I've ever seen. In fact, it's quite good and much better than a lot of Kickstarter games, and the revised printing is good. However, I think that there are some issues. In the rulebook, all the characters, this is essentially what is the cave. And it's nice that this fits on one page. But personally, I think that there ought to have been a bigger rules reference. I would like to have seen this be a meatier rulebook, because I've got to tell you that there have been several things in every game I've played, even the most recent ones, where I'm like, wait, how does that work? And I'd really like to have an index. I mean, this game is just, it's difficult. I understand the difficulty because it's so complex and there's all these different roles. It's hard to anticipate every single way in which they interact. And it's just my personal preference that when that happens, err on the side of being exhaustive. Have an entry for every thing and really explain every circumstance. It's better and you will get through it, and it's worth getting through. Trust me, it is. It's the kind of thing where it can be tough to get through, especially if you're gonna only play this game once. But as I've said repeatedly, this is not a game to play once. This is the kind of game that it could honestly be the only game you owned, and you could play it at all the different player counts, right? I think that if this at all sounds intriguing to you, you should absolutely go out and get this game. And if you try it and you're like, huh, that's interesting, but I'm not quite sure how I feel about it, I felt like maybe it was clunky, play it again and play it again. Because if you let yourself play, just trust me that if some games you don't get to appreciate, I wouldn't have appreciated this game as much as I do now if I did not force myself to play it as much as I needed to in order to review it. And I am so glad that I decided to review this game, because I could have seen myself being like, that's interesting, but like it's a little complicated and I don't feel like figuring it all out, so let's play something easier. But because I forced myself to play it again and again, every time it was even more fun than the last time. I mean, really, even more fun than the last time. And it is rare that a game is honestly that much better each time you play it. And it is now one of my favorite games. So with all those things in mind, I absolutely think that I recommend it. And I cannot wait to dig into Fearsome Foes, which we will be reviewing very soon. This adds new roles to the game, and I'm excited to see what they add.